Welcome to week 8 Wall Street Sells. All right. This is where we give you clues on how to take advantage of the teams in your league that are riddled with injuries and how to go sell certain players to them and maybe find something that helps your team. Right, Tony?
That's the plan. That's the plan.
Little bamboozling, if you will. But hey,
You try.
don't hate the player, hate the game. Am I right? All right. All right, so we got 3 sales for you tonight. Professor, hit us with that first one.
Yeah, so just kind of what you're talking about, Kyle. A lot of fantasy and in the kind of the art of trading is knowing when to move on and off players, right? Moving them at the right time. And sometimes you have to be a little bit of a contrarian, which is to sell players when they're at a peak and buy them when they're at a low. And I'll just give you one example. Marvin Harrison explodes in week 2, and everybody is kind of dying to have Marvin Harrison. And since then, it's been crickets. And so, typically you want to try and identify where some of those peaks and valleys are and just selling players at the right time to try and acquire an ascending player. And so the first guy that I have on my list tonight that kind of fits that criteria is Javonte Williams, running back with the Denver Broncos. Now, he looked pretty good this past week, and he has a great matchup this week. And so, that for me is just a great opportunity to entice someone to buy into Javonte Williams. They see the great game he just had. They see the upcoming matchup this week. What you also need to know, though, is on the other side of that matchup this week against the Panthers is he's got some really difficult matchups. So I also am just a little bit concerned about S time and maybe what his load might look like moving forward between both the remaining schedule after Carolina and the threat that's sitting out there with S time, who tends to be a little bit more efficient of a runner than Javonte Williams. Definitely has me a bit concerned about his long-term value rest of the season.
Yeah, and the workload's been there for Javonte, but like you said, nice matchups. That offense is still not a very prolific offense. It's still not operating super efficiently. So definitely, I agree with you. It's definitely a good time to get him out there and see what you can get for him. All
Yeah.
right.
I mean, that's what we're trying to do, right? The right is the timing.
Exactly. It's all about timing. All right, man. Hit us with that second player you're getting rid of.
Well, since we're talking about timing, that kind of leads me right into my next player, who everyone last week was scrambling to get to acquire. Saw him kind of score a touchdown, and now all of a sudden, this to me is just a perfect sell opportunity on Amari Cooper. And here's my issue with Cooper. It's not necessarily the player. I like the talent. It's the Buffalo in the scheme, in the offensive scheme that they run, and with underneath the leadership of Joe Brady, they tend to rotate their receivers an awful lot, and you don't have any one receiver who is averaging a significant snap share, and so it's hard to kind of garner those targets if you're not playing 90, 95, 100% of the snaps, which that's just not Buffalo's. That's just not the way Buffalo runs their offense. The other issue that I have with Cooper is their schedule is brutal for opposing receivers. They've also got the Jets during the championship weeks for the fantasy playoffs. And I think just a combination of the rotation, the remaining schedule, especially during those championship weeks, kind of sets this up for me as a great sell high opportunity on Amari Cooper.
Yeah, you're right. Last week, all the hype around him going to the Bills, he saw him getting traded around a whole lot, people pursuing him. But I'm with you. The rotation, the schedule. One other note that me and Corey have talked about in the past with Diggs, and Corey brought it up again on Weekly Kickoff this week, was that as you get deeper in the season in Buffalo, in the cold, in the snow, they run more. Diggs always fell off at the end of the year. He always disappeared on you in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah.
And I think you can see that happen with Cooper the same way this year. So always got to be wary of those Buffalo pass catchers once you get down that late in the season.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean that kind of is a nail in the coffin for me, so to speak.
Yeah. Hit that Undertaker gong, right?
Exactly.
All right. And then we got number 3.
So number 3 is a little bit of a tougher case for me to make. But I'm kind of going with historical data. And again, I'm looking at matchups, I'm looking at schedule, and I incorporate that a lot into kind of how I read players and their trajectory. The third guy I have is T Higgins with the Bengals. He's been on fire from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to note while you're kind of looking over his his production so far this year, to look at the teams that they've played, and he's had a very, very favorable schedule for receivers, and for the rest of the season, it's just going to be a brutal lineup for him of teams who are very, very difficult matchups at the receiver position. Higgins also has not demonstrated historically the ability to stay consistent over the entirety of a full season. I expect, I don't expect that to change this year, especially considering the matchups that are upcoming. So for me, I'm looking at T Higgins almost as kind of, I don't want to say fool's gold, but a guy that I am trying to kind of leverage and take advantage of and sell and move on to a different player.
He also lacks the ability to stay healthy, I feel like, a lot
Yes.
too. And like you said, I've always said, I don't think we busted this quote out yet this year, but the best ability is what?
Availability.
Availability. That's right. So yeah, I never feel super comfortable anytime I have T Higgins on a roster, just because I know he's going to miss time, and I know he's going to have games where he completely disappears, and that makes me very nervous. Very nervous. So,
yes,
I'm with you.
There, by the way, just one last point. They're scheduled during the fantasy playoffs, again, brutal. So if you're thinking ahead and you're looking towards the fantasy playoffs, of course you got to get there to actually field a roster. But if you do, he's not a guy that you're going to want in your starting lineup.
Yeah. So take him to the 1-7 team or the 1-6 team in your league. Get his guy that started slow and has a great playoff schedule, and go get that.
Yeah, try and move him for Tyreek. If the Tyreek owners are getting weary, Tua coming back, or Malik. I talked earlier about Malik. Maybe you can move T and another player and upgrade to Malik Neighbors. That type of a trade.
That would be money. All right. Thank you, Professor. Everybody, good luck in week 8. Go get your trades done, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Kyle.